From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In the NOCO, your daily slice of Northern Colorado news and happenings. I'm Erin O'Toole. The sugar beet industry began in Colorado right around 1900. Today, it's only a small part of the state's economy, but through the early part of the 20th century, beets were kind of a big deal. They were the most significant agricultural product grown here. They were so important to the economy that people referred to sugar beets as white gold. During this time, thousands of Hispanic and Mexican people came to northern Colorado to work in the beet fields. Many of them eventually settled in Fort Collins, predominantly in what would come to be called the Tres Colonias, 3 neighborhoods that surrounded the Great Western Sugar Company. Betty Aragon-Matotes is something of an expert on the legacy of the families who settled in this area. She's been a longtime community leader advocating for Hispanic and Latino communities, and she co-founded a cultural center spotlighting the Tres Colonias neighborhoods. I spoke with her late last year about this fascinating era of northern Colorado history. I want to talk about the indelible contributions of the Hispanic and Latino communities on northern Colorado really over the last 100 years. And to do that, we kind of need to start with the sugar beet. Even though it's not really visible anymore here, the sugar beet industry was a very powerful part of the economy.
Right. The sugar beet, it was an empire. A lot of the factories were in Fort Collins, Loveland, Greeley. In 1901, they made $3.1 million in production. That's why they call it white gold, because the sugar beet industry, it made Fort Collins flourish. And so, of course, the sugar beet industry needed a lot of labor. The amount of labor needed was so massive that Great Western set up an office in the El Paso Juarez and started recruiting Mexican nationals. And so at that time, the revolution was going on in Mexico. So between 1900 and 1930, we had 1 million that came into the U.S. 50,000 of those came into Northeast Colorado.
And you co-founded the Museo de las Tres Colonias to call attention to this aspect of Fort Collins and northern Colorado's culture and history. And you've led efforts to honor and acknowledge the really backbreaking work that these sugar beet workers endured. And it sounds like this was just such a sacrifice.
It was a sacrifice. You know, a lot of people, especially the Hispanics, had to work with the short hoe. And because they worked with that short hoe, they were doing the stoop labor. So that meant that they were bent over or they were on their hands and knees and using that short hoe. It was great for the farmers. The owners loved it because supposedly it did a better job, but it was at the price of people and damaging their backs. One of the things that really made me so angry when I kept thinking about it was children. Children don't belong in the fields. Of course, then they didn't have any child labor laws, and they were in the fields with their families. But because the stoop labor was so bad on the backs, their spines didn't grow correctly. So they had problems with growing, right? And of course, the damage that it did to so many people's backs that still complain today.
Well, you have led a lot of efforts to honor and acknowledge this work. And that is symbolized, among other things, with a monument that's in Sugar Beet Park in Fort Collins. I'm wondering, what do you hope people today will understand about what life was like back then for these workers?
Being able to do the monument, I felt like it was really necessary in order to continue to educate the community, but to take away the stigma that was related to people that were working in the sugar beet industry. There was a certain amount of shame. People looked down on you because you were working in the beet fields, right? But you were providing a tremendous amount of service for not a whole lot of money. You know, I can't even express the feelings when we did that monument and I saw so many tears flow that day. You know, it was just, it came full circle, you know, for honoring forgotten people. and their contributions and that they contribute today.
You're so right, because I think we look upon this area today, northern Colorado, Fort Collins, Greeley, and we think, it's thriving. And this is really because of the contributions that were made decades ago.
And they continue. I mean, there's still people working in the fields. I passed through Greeley not too long ago and saw all the potato that was being picked, right? And what I want to continue to advocate for is making sure that they're getting paid a decent, honest wage today, working conditions that are really humanistic, because I still hear that conditions still aren't what they need to be.
Could you talk about how your work has changed over the years? Has it, what you were heavily focused on 20 years ago versus now, has that changed?
You know what? Not really, because my work continues to educate people about the culture, the history. In doing that, I've gone to city council so many times in the past fighting about affordable housing and making sure that people that work here can live here, and certainly in the Tres Colonias neighborhoods. And, I think today the way that it has changed is that I found an avenue where I could really reach people so that they could see the impact. And I did that through film. I produced 3 films that I felt like really made an impact on educating the community. We did the monument, which I feel has really given the Hispanic and Mexican community a sense of pride that we have cemented our place in history now. And then we just finished the mural that was placed on Los Tarascos restaurant, which I thought the artist was brilliant in focusing on the woman.
Yeah.
So the work continues, and I'm working on my new project. It will be honoring baseball, because back in the day, Mexicans and Hispanics that were working in the beet fields, they couldn't play with the white players because of the discrimination. So they started their own leagues and played other leagues up and down the Northern Front Range. And so now I want to work on getting some kind of recognition at City Park. That's where a lot of the Hispanics played. And I want to do, whether it's a statue or some kind of recognition to honor the baseball players, because that was huge back in the day of the beet works. When the people were working the beets, these men this is how they did their playtime.
Betty, it's been so great to talk to you. Thanks for the work you do, and thanks for talking with me about it today.
Erin, thank you so much for the opportunity. I just feel really blessed to have this connection.
You'll find links in our show notes to learn more about the Tres Colonias neighborhoods, about Betty, and the work of her foundation, Mujeres de Colores. That's it for us today here on In the NOCO. We'll be back next week with more of what's happening in northern Colorado. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thank you so much for listening, and have a great weekend.